two things if the player will relax. Either you get eliminated, then you relax after that, or you win the championship, then you can relax after. So in between, anywhere in between, I don't think you'll be relaxing as a player.
Do you think they should try to relax more? Because I mean,
That's
it's a
actually a
2-week
brilliant
event,
point.
right? To go full focus for 2 weeks, that's insane. That's almost inhuman.
Yeah, I think depending on like certain players would feel that it's a matter of different type of views between teams. Some teams feel that it's much better to actually get the most out of the time you have here to prepare. Some teams feel, oh, maybe it's better that we actually spend some time with friends or spend some time with like going to the movies, just take your mind off the games. And some teams just like, I know some teams they are actually, we should use every bit of time to just watch. We don't want to be like, oh damn, we actually missed that.
Right.
And
Yeah.
we went for a break. We could have actually used that time to, you don't want to regret. So
You bring up a game. I was just thinking about this because I would actually do it differently in each situation, I think. But if you're studying for standardized tests, especially in the States, for instance, like the SAT or ACT, the tip that most people give when they're teaching students or mentoring students, they say the night before you should go watch a movie or like watch a TV show and just relax. Don't study at all the night before and go to sleep early. Do you think that applies? Because like you said,
I can imagine that, people are going to be distracted by a screen. I think we all are sometimes. So at the same time, if you're having dinner, then I think maybe new ideas can come, and maybe it's a good way to brainstorm rather than in your practice room, just in different scenario, different setting.
I get ideas when I'm alone in the room staring at the PC. I'm like, oh, ding.
yeah, like thinking about yeah. I mean that you do get distracted very easily, and because
Yeah.
it's a familiar setting, so you just go into your habit and you think about things. But yeah, just something interesting to think about. Maybe something we'll notice more and more as we see the scene continue to develop. I mean, it's grown so much already. You were just mentioning, and after that first best of 3, that's going to be a difference of whether you get $1 million or not. But 4 years ago, we were all blown away at that prize pool for the winner, the TI champs.
Yeah.
At TI1. So we've come a long way overall in esports, and of course for Dota 2, it's been absolutely explosive and very exciting. We were talking earlier, Ben, I mean, when Sin was still here, we were talking about just how, of course, the caliber also seems to have developed a lot too. What do you think about that, actually? Overall TI caliber from TI5 compared to the past TIs?
I mean, in TI3, it was what Alliance was the clear favorites, and TI4, I would say like DK and EG were pretty high up, and then we got surprised by the top 2. And this year, I mean, there are clear favorites, but the skill level I think has been like squeezed a little bit in terms of the difference between its first place and the 16th place team is getting closer and closer each year.
Right.
It makes it much more difficult to predict, and I think the format also allows for a lot of surprises, even though it is a rather long format with the round robin. Like, teams have so many chances to prove themselves, and like even Newbie. I mean, Newbie is, I think, a great example of like, oh, we had no hopes for them, but they're doing very well. It looks like actually Empire ended up taking the victory, but I think they've drawn with every single
They did.
team. And
Yeah, at this point, and that's not a bad result to have
we
so
were
far.
discussing about it before. If Newbie were to draw 7 games.
Yeah, there's still the possibility of them going in top 4 depending on how the other matches. At that point, you really are reliant on the other results. I do believe we have some highlights from the end of the game here for Empire versus Newbie in Game 2. So this is where Empire comes back. I mean, Ben, Newbie looked like they were trying to win.
they had to push high ground, and we've talked about being able to push high ground against Ember Spirit, but Empire has Magnus, and they don't have like the Magnus, like AM Magnus PA, like we see with the very heavy high ground defense heroes. But I mean, just pushing versus that RP alone is just insanely difficult, and it looks like teams have been valuing that a lot just because of how weak some teams are at breaching that first racks.
And overall, Magnus is one of those heroes that no matter how far behind you are, if you get a good RP, there's always a chance to come back, and that just gives a lot of confidence, I think, as well as a team. If you're playing, that you know that you always have a chance. So.
Yeah, I think the beginning at the end was just a 2-man RP on Ember
Yes.
+1, which is not that devastating. I would say that's a very acceptable outcome for an ultimate, but it's just that they have so much burst and so much follow-up. People die in that like 1 second skewer back to the base.
So there we have it. Empire winning
1-1.
against Newbie. Yeah, 1-1 result. So Newbie, I mean, I would say, especially for them, I feel like they would be pretty content considering that no one was really expecting them to do that well. It sounded like Newbie also wasn't really sure exactly how high they should place their goals coming in. They were just like, all right, we're here. Of course, we're going to do our best, but we're not going to come in saying, like, we're going to be the TI champs. We're just going to try to play out each game and see where we end up.
At the same time, though, you can feel it. Like, they're like thirsting for each
Yeah.
2-0 in each of these games. They're like, oh man, we can actually be in top 4.
Yeah.
It's very realistic.
Yeah, very.
Still also, right?
Yeah, definitely still possible. And interesting that we talk about that. Our next match coming up, it is EG versus eHome. And looking at the standings, eHome also 0-3-0 record. So here, if eHome upsets and takes EG 2-0, that's only going to kind of shift the balance. And Newbie also has less of a chance. eHome suddenly boosts their chance by quite a bit by getting those 3 points. But EG definitely looking pretty strong. And we talked about this. They don't look that strong on day ones oftentimes. Then they pick it up. They're back in the groove. Their drafting was quite spectacular yesterday, in my opinion. What do you think, Ben?
They're not very prone to mistakes or tilting, for that matter. And if they have a bad game, they're just like, okay, well, we'll have a better draft for game 2, and they'll just play very safely. I think they trust PPD very much when it comes to drafting and playstyle, and it shows in the confidence of their play and how Sumail plays very aggressively and what heroes they give to Fear. They all trust their game plan, and it generally works out to be a very sound and swift one.
Yeah. Winter, what are your thoughts about EG, their shift from day 1 to day 2, and just what we saw from them yesterday? Even on our side, when we were talking about it, we were all pleasantly surprised with, okay, EG's back. This is what EG does. Even if, for instance, we weren't really expecting the Enchantress pick, after you look at it, you guys were discussing, oh, in hindsight, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. It's very EG.
Yeah, we were discussing about, I think in particular I brought up the fact that the difference between the stronger teams and like the ones slightly below is the ability to fix things and to, to not rectify whatever you feel is wrong in front of. Yes, they did. They didn't have a good first day. I mean, the first series, but right after that, they changed their draft slightly. I would say because they had more data to work with against their opponents. Like everyone played games and they were able to watch everyone else play and decide that, oh, this is probably better for us and we should probably play like this. And the bans that we saw every game, every opponent, they had different bans. It's very good to know. Good to note that EG bans differently against different opponents. Like again, Hot 6, they took out Earthshaker and Lina, which is something not common at all in the first 2 bans, and it shows a lot. It talks a lot about how EG is as a team.
A lot of preparation goes into that, and you can just tell. I'm mostly curious for the next matchup, EG eHome. I mean, for eHome, very experienced players in there. EG, very experienced player. I'm curious how that's going to clash if the games are going to go late game, which we don't know yet for sure, but I think that if it does, we're going to have a really good match on our hands.
Yeah, day 1 and 2, we were like, all right, games are going much longer than we thought. And then we come into day 3, we kick it off with C9 versus IG going way shorter than I think anyone expected. And even on our mainstream, a lot of our games have been relatively short compared to those first 2 days. Do you think this is just a product of matchups, or do do you think it's also just kind of everyone now feeling things out in terms of draft for the other teams, having more information on each other?
Teams are a lot more confident. I think Cloud9 is probably the most prime example of a team that has, had a shaky first series against LGD, and then after that, it's just dominating. They dominated IG with their shutout, and overall, you can just feel it when you watch their games. They're like winning all three of their lanes. They're moving around. They're communicating. And I think some of the teams that we watch, they just, one pick off here or there, or like their lanes just don't go as well as expected, and then they seem a little bit lost. And Cloud9 seems the complete opposite from that.
All right. Now, before we go into the draft, players are getting ready. We're setting everything up, draft of Game 1. Something we talked about earlier, we had some fun stats about Ember, of course, and how we had like the Chinese teams dominating in the early 2 days with that non-Chinese teams not doing so well. Now that's been shifted off. But whenever we watch, of course, we don't get to discuss everything after the game because we're out of time oftentimes. You guys like to kind of theorize on your own about builds and even skill builds and whatnot. And one thing that came up with Ember was, Ember with treads. And for me, like, I don't know that well, but what's your take, Ben?
Well, the standard build has been phase drums or phase drums Battle Fury or phase Battle Fury because you want plus damage for your phase boots, so you do more with each Sleight of Fist. And you don't need any attack speed at all because Sleight of Fist is on a timed cooldown. And we've been seeing a lot more treads recently. Sumail, I think, was probably one of he's the player that got treads. I saw it yesterday. I saw it today too. And maybe it's just to make him a little bit more tanky. I think if you're really far ahead, you can go with bots. I think maybe tends to get this build a lot, but that's my preference.
What about you, Winter? What's your take?
I don't really like treads. I don't really like face puts, but I like bots.
Ben's going to leave you hanging. He's like, yeah, I like bots too. And Ben's like, yeah, whatever. I like bots. That's right. I started that trend. But so Ben, you gave us your reason. But if you were